Good afternoon. My name is Keehn. I'm the moderator today, and this panel is the Agents of Change, the Innovation Leaders Transforming Higher Education. So if this is not the session you're supposed to be in, stay anyway, because it's going to be great. So I'm going to let my panel warm up by introducing themselves. Harrison?
Sure. I'm Harrison Keller. I'm the Commissioner of Higher Education for the state of Texas.
Hi, I'm Suzanne Dove. I'm Assistant Vice President for Strategy and Innovation at Bentley University. We're a business-focused university right outside Boston.
Good afternoon. Asim Ali. I'm at Auburn University, working in academic innovation out of the Biggio Center, which is a central unit located.
Hi, everyone. Bharat Anand, Vice Provost for Advances in Learning at Harvard, and a faculty member at Harvard Business School.
Great. In addition to being your moderator, I'm also the co-principal investigator along with the University of Michigan. James, you want to raise your hand in the back there? We have been working on a research project, which is actually the impetus of this panel, and it's called Leading Academic Change National Survey 2.0. You will see in your seats, this is the information about the survey. Many of you have answered it. If you're not, I think you probably could sneak it in. But if you'd also like a copy of the survey report, there's a QR code here that will allow you to sign up to get the report, which should come out early June. And also, I'd like to thank, this report would not be possible without with our sponsors. So certainly University of Michigan, and then also I'd like to thank our Platinum sponsor, CLASS, and do we have any other sponsors in the room? Acadium, IntelliBoard. There you go. Thank you. So anyway, thank you. So let's get started. This conversation actually started 10 years ago. 10 years ago, we had a leading academic change summit, and it was held at University of Maryland. And the reason we had this summit, it began with this backstory to it. It began with a question, and we know the power of a good question. And this question came from the co-chairs of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. At the time, I was a senior fellow for technology and innovation for the post-secondary team. And the co-chairs, Bill and Melinda Gates, were looking at investing tens of millions of dollars into funding the development of digital courseware. And as many of you know, let me ask, who's in the audience? Who's here from EdTech? Are you an ed tech company? Okay, how many of you are from academic innovation centers? Okay, nonprofits, investment community? Okay, great. So as you know, when you sell or work with K-12, a lot of the decision making is top down. When you're working with higher education, it's often not so much that it's complicated, but it's complex. And we know that if you're working with faculty and you're looking at selling them or developing with them digital courseware or digital technologies, it's not a top-down decision. And the decision usually is involved with faculty and then also around centers for academic innovation, which is why we're having this conversation today, so that you could get to better know how these centers of academic innovation operate. And the survey was really to help shine the light on what are the models of academic innovation and who are they and how are they funded and staffed. So to get started, I'm going to ask you a couple lightning round questions just to warm up everybody since it's after lunch and it's a little hot in this room. So if you were to have an anthem and a song, what would that anthem around academic innovation be? What song would you pick? Okay, Bharat.
You want to start with me?
Yeah, I'll start with you.
It's completely obvious. Stairway to Heaven.
There you go. Okay.
Yeah, I think I'd pick a good jazz song because you never know what the solos are going to end up playing like, and they all hopefully meld together really well into resulting in something that's enjoyable.
I'm going to go with the Beatles, Help. Because when you were younger, you thought you could do this alone, but then you realized you need somebody.
Yes.
For me, another obvious one would be Don't Stop Believin'. at this point.
That's great. Well, I'm glad nobody picked a total eclipse of the heart because that was played a lot last week. Okay, so next question. Is academic innovation, is it a field? Is it a role? Is it a mindset?
I think generally it starts off as a role because maybe even institutions don't really quite know what that means and how it all fits in. And hopefully it becomes a field. And then certainly from an institutional mindset, we certainly want it to become that, we want it to be more prevalent across campus. So it's a good way to, in my view, it's a good way to kind of see where institutions are in their maturity level, is if it's just a person who's kind of slogging it along and trying to see what help they can get, or is there some kind of a central effort around the work that needs to be happening? And then eventually, hopefully, you've got some results in terms of projects or institutional strategic goals that you've got developed around the mindset that it needs to have, that not just innovation, but entrepreneurial mindset in terms of solving the problems that we face.
I'd say it's real. It's not an oxymoron, even though we might think it is. It's more of a mindset. I don't think it's a field yet. But I'd say it's probably a process and a journey. And the one thing I'd add is, in some sense, I noticed when you asked the question, who's involved in academic innovation centers, some of my colleagues who are did not raise their hands because they probably don't know what this refers to. So, in some sense, it's like when we think about institutions, teaching and learning is a highly decentralized activity, right? It happens at the level of individual faculty and individual classrooms, and there's innovation happening there all the time.
Right.
At the programmatic level, you might think about introducing a new program, online, hybrid, whatever it is. There, the innovation's coming from the deans or the program heads or department chairs. And then at the university level, you're thinking about infrastructure that can enable, you're trying to set strategy. So in some sense, I think it occurs at multiple levels rather than just discrete units.
Suzanne?
Yeah, I think of it first and foremost as a role, and that part of the charge of that role is to help build the mindset at individual levels and organizational levels as well. And I think when we fall short is when certain people, within the university will think, well, I'm not an innovator. I guess that's something that group over there is going to do. When I started at Bentley University, I actually had some folks come to the Badavas Center for Innovation in Teaching and Learning, which was the first sort of toehold that I found there. And they said, well, so are you going to innovate us? And, it just made me laugh because it was so impossible. But it is about inculcating that mindset. So.
Yeah, I'd agree with pretty much everything that folks just said. It's a nascent field. I think you have to be careful about it just being a role, because just like earlier in my career, I ran a center for teaching and learning. I had the opportunity to see how a lot of folks ran them around the country. There are a lot of places where these roles and these centers are release valves for creative energy. And so, you're one of these faculty who wants to innovate. Well, you go over there, and then it helps insulate the rest of the institution from meaningful change, to be candid, right? So I think really if you're going to do something at scale, it has to be more of a mindset, and it has to be more of a mindset that's endorsed by the leadership of the institution. And then you can build that into the structure and the roles that you have at the institution.
So where do these centers situate on campus? Who do you report to?
So again, it depends, Anne. I think I'd probably break it up into, just from personal experience, I've had 2 roles that relate to this in the last 10 years. My current role as Vice Provost, I report to the Provost of the university. And we oversee teaching and learning and the strategic direction and so on for the 12 schools, which are, by the way, highly decentralized. But that's a role that's inserted into the existing administrative structures.
Right.
10 years ago, when I still am at Harvard Business School, when we were trying to create Harvard Business School online, that was an entirely new venture. We put it separate from the existing structures, outside executive education, outside publishing, outside the MBA program, reporting directly to the dean. And part of the reason was, and I think this goes back to the whole mantra of disruptive innovation, you can't innovate truly within existing structures. So I think it really depends on what kind of innovation you want to pursue. The one phrase I've always kept in mind is, this is a phrase I learned from a Norwegian media company that's been one of the most successful in digital transformation. They talked about forgetting and borrowing. It's like when we innovate, we want to forget the existing mindsets and routines and processes, and that calls for separation. But at the same time, we want to borrow faculty, the brand, and so on. And that tension to me is always very real and palpable.
Well, we definitely see the tension. We also see that some of these centers have really grown out of centers for teaching and learning. And when we did this research 10 years ago, the research study was around centers in support of teaching and learning. And this particular study decided to expand because we know, as you said, innovation is diffused. And we really wanted to look at the academic innovation models and who are the leaders, where are they situated? Because when you're trying to work with institutions or even work across institutions or across a whole state like Harrison, it's important to know who are these people. And I know you told me that you started out as a Center for Teaching and Learning. So tell us a little bit about where you're situated.
Auburn, the Biggio Center was established about 20 years ago with essentially that idea of, hey, let's work with faculty to help them upskill in terms of their teaching skills. Completely outside of that org structure, I started Auburn Online 10 years ago. And what we noticed was that an effort around partnering with faculty, giving them a space to be able to kind of unbundle what's expected of them and be able to grow in terms of trying new things, taking those risks. We found that the Auburn Online unit was able to provide that better than maybe some of the traditional mindset of a classic Center for Teaching and Learning. And so at Auburn, what we actually did was in January of 2020, I started this new role where the provost said, I want to take all centrally supported and all central resources that support academic, essentially anything instructional, and just put that all under one organizational umbrella. We timed it really well for the pandemic, but immediately we saw the returns on that, right? Is because we had all folks across multiple units at the central level kind of with this clear mind of we have to support the faculty to make sure that students have access to the success that we want them to have in terms of the experience. I think we've seen that in the last several years is a lot of these kinds of units are within the provost's offices. I think that my perception is based on my interaction with colleagues around the country is we're going to start seeing that these units are actually capable of more than just in the classroom innovation. And we're going to start seeing a shift of these units being more in the president's offices, where they're not only supporting the academic innovation that's happening, but as we start thinking about holistically the student experience, the digital experience that students are having from the first contact all the way through the lifelong learning kinds of ideas that we see, we're going to start needing to be a little bit more strategic from an institutional level, which makes more sense to be out of the president's office.
Yeah,
Suzanne.
that relates well with my experience at Bentley. Certainly, the Badavas Center was established with the word innovation first in its title, and it was explicit that it was not intended to be a traditional center for teaching and learning. And I think, fortunately, we, just after the pandemic, our president, President Crate, launched a strategic planning effort. And so the Falcons Forward 2030 plan, one of its top recommendations was actually to establish a strategy and innovation division, which is a presidential cabinet position, our VP for strategy and innovation, and then the Badavas Center now comes under that division. It's been really helpful. The priorities that we're able to pursue are the priorities that are within our strategic plan, and it really has a lot to do with reaching new audiences and thinking about where business education can really transform lives way beyond just the sort of traditional 18 to 22-year-old, but what are the ways that we're going to reach those audiences? So bringing in the digital learning has become a big priority for us as well.
So Harrison, you have a unique point of view, being at the coordinating board and across the state. How many institutions are?
We've got about 94 public institutions of about 1.6 million students in public higher ed. And all of them don't do what I say. So, I mean, so it's not, we've got a lot of coordinating responsibilities, not a direct
Hence the coordinating board
authority. Right, exactly. Let me underline the coordinating resource partner advocate. So what we see is institutions do situate these efforts lots of different places. Sometimes in the provost's office, I'd raise a flag about that, honestly, because as the institutions become more and more complicated, what I've heard from my friends who are provosts is these have become more and more challenging management jobs, almost impossible to manage. And so when these efforts are just yet another initiative that's stuck somewhere in the provost's office, it might not have the kind of profile and energy and authority that it would have if it was closer to the president or closer to the cabinet, at least. So when I was at UT Austin, for a while was vice provost and then became deputy to the president. I felt like I was able to get a better traction when I was leading these efforts and speaking on behalf of the president. And folks knew I was in like the University Budget Council meetings and that kind of thing, versus when I was in the provost's office. The other thing that I'd say, just to throw out there for context, is that just a few years ago, when we were coming out of the pandemic, what we saw is institutions racing to put resources into their support structures for academic innovation and for online learning and digital learning for teaching and learning. Because these centers that were supporting a few dozen faculty innovators all of a sudden had to put thousands of courses online in the space of about 2 weeks. And they were completely overwhelmed. And so then the institutions, we rightfully refocused resources around educational innovation. It was like the brain-blood barrier was open to educational innovation in ways that we didn't anticipate. Now the urgency is really dissipated at a lot of institutions, and what I've seen is that many institutions, many presidents and provosts have pulled back those investments. And so we don't see them, they see these units as important, doing important work, but also yet another cost center, yet another competing ask for resources among these different university initiatives. And so that's another reason that you want to make sure, if you're serious about innovating at scale, it's got to have authority and be close enough to the center where you can focus those resources.
Yeah, I have to agree with you. When I had the catbird seat of being the global education lead for Zoom during the pandemic, and yeah, and I thought, well, it'll be interesting to see the centers that, or the institutions that had actually really strong centers for academic innovation or strong centers in support of teaching and learning, how would they do during the pandemic? And actually that was one of the questions we asked during the survey. And about 22% of the centers got started during the pandemic, but they definitely seem to have fared well. And so we are seeing a little bit of retreat, but not as much as one would think, because there's something new, and that new thing that we're all faced with now is the AI revolution. So I think there's certainly going to be a lot more work to be done, and certainly a lot more innovation. So let's talk a little bit about priorities. So, it'd probably be interesting for the audience to know, what are your priorities? And, are they aligned with your strategic institutional mission? So, Suzanne, do you want to go first?
Sure. Yeah, definitely. As I referred to before, our priorities are the priorities of our strategic plan. And we're thinking a lot about how do we actually execute on those things. And so building that culture of innovation within Bentley, we've been able to use our executive and professional education sort of offerings as a sandbox. It allows us to draw faculty in. I think sometimes several people have referred to how, maybe the president and the provost think it's a really great idea to innovate, but then when you get down to the dean level or the department chair level, it's like, well, actually, we're not so available and we're not all that excited about this either. But having continuing education through a variety of incentives, we're able to draw people in. And one of the things that we've really been prioritizing is, how can we streamline, how can we templatize, how can we make the innovation process more agile? Because I think sometimes that's part of the problem. It can just, some universities maybe overcomplicate, and I think Bentley and my prior institution as well, I was at a public flagship. It was just really, really complicated. Innovation ideas would be, all the bells and whistles, and it was humongous, and it would just take forever, and it would just require a lot of large committee groups, and so trying to really streamline it, be really precise and a little bit more surgical. We think that may be a way that this becomes more a part of our DNA. So I'll stop with that.
Okay. Bharat, what are you focused on? What are your top
Sure.
priorities?
Maybe I'll say the initiatives emanate from our mindsets. And in some sense, I always look at it as like 3 different mindsets or 3 different hats that I wear depending on the day. One is just convening, surfacing ideas that are already happening at the ground level in the classrooms, sharing them across the university, evangelizing them. So we have a residential teaching and learning center that does a lot of that. But I'd also put into that bucket what we did during COVID. We were convening the academic leaders of the 12 schools who were all essentially drowning in the same kinds of problems, and they discovered that the other schools were sharing the same challenges. So that I'd put under the bucket of convening, surfacing, sharing, evangelizing. And that continues on a day-to-day basis. The second is, at least in our office, we also do content creation in the online space. So that team probably is 70% of my entire team. It's about 50 people. And there we create, probably many of you know, the Harvard X courses, 150 to 200 of them, reach 10 to 15 million learners. So that's the content creation side, and a lot of the content creation also happens within the schools, depending on whether they have the resources. The third is what I would call vision setting, investment, strategic transformation at a sort of much longer time horizon. There, for instance, we are probably the most central project is we're trying to create a new learning experience platform for the university, building on our experience 10 years ago. But, and this is not an LMS, it's sort of plugging into the LMSs, but really trying to create inspiring learning experiences that anchor in our pedagogical methods. We're now building this for the entire university, but one of the things we've seen is many other institutions and organizations and universities are facing the same challenge. Right. And so part of what we're trying to do is also see how we can make this available to those institutions. So that's a third bucket, which is longer horizon, longer term, lot of retail effort that goes on. So those are the 3.
I know we're not out of time, but.
So I think, for us, first of all, I empathize. I understand that there is a set of institutions that are struggling for enrollments in this country, and that's a very difficult place to be in terms of needing to innovate, needing to just try new things because survival depends on it. So with that just acknowledged, as an R1 institution, Auburn is not in that position. So our driver really is around how do we continually improve the experience that we're providing for our students. We get to say, how do we do this in a way that's unique for our brand? So we're not going to have 100 programs online trying to have starts every 3 weeks, because that's not us. And so we have the luxury of being able to say, what is it that our students want? What is it that our students need? So we tend to focus on strategic goals so every project that our unit takes on is driven by either a department chair, a dean, or a senior executive strategic endeavor and strategic goal, which means that not only are we providing some internal funding to augment whatever's being done, but they're also bringing resources to the table, and that's what's helped us launch. Whether it's undergraduate or graduate online programs, certificates, non-credit programs. Artificial intelligence, for example, because we've got this unit that not only develops, markets, and supports learners in online programs, we also now have professional development for faculty, instructional technology support. So about a little over a year ago, I also teach in our business school, a Harvard school, I guess we got a little extra letter in there. And so, I noticed this idea of AI needing to be something that we need to upskill our faculty for, right? Well, for the last 10 years, we've been talking about asynchronous online programs needing to upskill working professionals and the importance of launching that. Well, when it comes to generative AI, our faculty are those professionals. And so a little over a year ago, we launched a fully online non-credit program in teaching with AI. And it was adopted by not only faculty and graduate students at Auburn, but it's now used at over 90 institutions and around 10,000 faculty around the country and Canada, because we're able to bring that upskilling need, but then also the marketing and the entrepreneurial mindset of the online unit. And so what it does is it allows us to demonstrate for the faculty, hey, that pandemic stuff that we were doing, thanks for doing that. That's not really a good perspective of what online learning can be. So let's create an experience that lets you say, here's what online learning can be. So not only are we seeing the residual benefit in terms of faculty upskilling with in an engaged online learning environment for being ready for artificial intelligence, but they're also saying, hey, how do I make my course look like this? And so now they're able to engage with us in terms of improving the overall quality of the courses that we're able to develop. And then, I know we kind of refer to the pandemic as the big pandemic kind of experience, and I kind of have hot sweats about that every morning, cold sweats or whatever, just in terms of what that experience was like. But the reality is that, in a perspective, a lot of things that are impacting us are pandemic level, right? How authentic are the assessments in the classroom? Mm-hmm. That's kind of that's a real existential question that we should be asking. Generative artificial intelligence is a pandemic level kind of a threat if we ignore it. And so how do we continue to kind of make sure that we're providing the resources, providing the support? Harrison made an excellent point. We don't see ourselves as a cost center. We have to make sure that we're continually telling the story in terms of how we're doing the work that we're doing, and that it is something that's critical to the success of the institution as well as to the faculty and the students that we serve.
Just an unbiased, independent shout out for the course they created on generative AI. It's an asynchronous course. There's clutter in the Gen AI space, like faculty are overwhelmed, and it's just a wonderful way to tell faculty about how to engage in this.
Yeah.
That's
Thanks.
great.
Yeah.
Harrison, I'll ask you a question in a second, but I wanted to share with you a little bit of 10 years ago we asked this question, and the number one priority was faculty engaging with students. How can we get faculty better engaged? Number 5 was online programs, and actually interesting, number 4 was leveraging the cloud for an LMS. So 10 years now forward, number 1, which focus has been online programs, but what surprised me was on-campus programs. How do we improve not only online programs, but on-campus programs? And then the second one was faculty, in support of faculty and faculty development. And then number 3 was generative AI. And then number 4 was access. How can we better improve access across, different student types? And so I thought that was interesting. Harrison, when you are looking at funding initiatives, what you can name like 3 top initiatives that you're going to fund at your institutions?
Yeah, so first, especially from where we sit, so if we're talking about the strategic priority, we have a talent problem. We have a talent problem in Texas. We have a talent problem in the United States. So what we don't want to do is fund individual institutions' initiatives that may enhance the experience for students who are already being served, but don't scale, right? Mm-hmm. So one of the things we've learned to do is to try to bake into, we provide innovation grants across institutions, and so we put funding into, for example, we've got a suite of college readiness materials that UT and Rice and A&M collaborated on, and now have pulled in community colleges to that work as well. So if you've got multiple institutions represented around the table, better chance that those resources are going to be able to be consumed by multiple institutions. We found that the resources that you develop at a single institution and then try to broadcast, you don't generally get as much uptake, right? So that's one lesson. Another thing is that we put a lot of funding into OER. We funded development of a consortium of nursing schools for OER for nursing materials that are on Rice OpenStacks that can be adapted to multiple contexts. And so that ability to adapt the content to your context is really, really important also for the adoption. Other thing I'd like to say just as an aside, though, is again, just to underline how significant I think the gap is between like the kinds of problems policymakers are trying to solve and that they're worried about, and the kinds of problems that a lot of folks leading educational innovation are trying to solve within their institutions. I think one of the things we need to do is close that gap so that we can secure more resources and more buy-in for our institutions, because I've seen it so many times where you have educational innovators or presidents will get up and testify and talk about how they're enhancing the educational experience for their students after they just told you, well, we got 80,000 applications and we turned away more than 60,000 of them. But let me tell you how great it is for the folks who are able to get into our institution. That doesn't land very well with the policymakers. Frankly, it doesn't land very well with employers who are not getting enough of the kinds of credentials we need to produce. So I think we need to embrace the challenge of taking on the talent problem that we have.
Yeah.
Can I just feed off one thing that Harrison said? The scale problem, right? Because when we think about equity and access, it's unlikely we're going to solve that problem through only relying on existing institutions of higher education. There's two different perspectives. One is the perspective that we take as leaders within some of these universities, and the second is Harrison's perspective, looking across institutions. By the way, I will say on that, we don't quite have 80,000 applicants, but we have 55,000. We are unlikely to move the needle on equity and access by just relying on residential degrees. There, our focus is very much along the lines of what Suzanne and Asim is saying. But when we take the external perspective, some of you might know, there's organizations, Asim, Stephanie Corana's here, the CEO of Asim, that was the offshoot of edX, policies, state boards, and so on, that are trying to address that problem exactly the way Harrison said, which is, let's look at models that are working, let's invest in them because they might have multiplier impact. The only thing I'd add is the notion of scale is something we thought about for a long time. I would just add a phrase there, which is engagement at scale or impact at scale. And part of the reason I say this is when the whole MOOC revolution was fundamentally about trying to move the needle on equity and access at scale. But the most sobering statistic is when you see that 75% of those who complete one of those non-degree courses already have a college degree. It's a very sobering statistic because you realize you need the support structures that don't just come with providing content. And I think that's part of the challenge I think we're all trying to deal with.
I mean, I think it's also uniquely a U.S. challenge. I mean, I had a chance to travel internationally recently working with institutions in other parts. For us, we've equated quality with limited access. And, you go to Australia or Canada, and the highest ranking institutions have 50,000, 80,000, 100,000 students. And here, if we had an institution with 100,000 students, we almost, unless they're making the news for being something like an ASU, we almost want to dismiss them as an institution of high quality. And that's a conversation that we need to have ourselves in terms of how do we define quality and can that be synonymous with access.
So let me ask a quick round question. Do you think these centers for academic innovation, transformation, change, with all the different titles that are out there, do you think they're growing in importance? Quick answer.
Yes.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, biased, but yes.
Yeah.
I think they will grow because technology has changed. And, there's sort of a schizophrenia within universities. Like, you see this retreat post-COVID on the one hand. On the other hand, a lot of universities are now saying we've got to build internal capabilities and rely less on the OPMs.
Correct.
Which means they're leaning in. Industry structure has changed as a result. But the last reason I think they'll grow is universities need to change. We will no longer be able to solve many of these problems by just relying on the traditional structures and processes we've had.
And our institutions, our centers for academic innovation, as we sometimes think of it as Bentley, we are the Navy SEALs. We are the ones that take on the most challenging pieces. And it is really hard to be a leader in higher education right now. And so I think people who are deans and provosts and presidents need partners like ourselves to help tackle that, have the energy, have the creativity, have the persistence, have the collaborative spirit to really be able to do that successfully.
Yeah, some of the, we put a design committee together for this, the 2.0 version of the survey, and I thought it was really interesting. Patrice from Harvard said, she said, this really helps shine the light on the work that we do because not everybody understands the work we do. Yeah. And when I think about, I work a lot with ed tech companies. I spent 30-some years working with ed tech companies. And when you think about your solutions and if it affects teaching and learning, student success, you need to know these people. They're making decisions. It's not the CIOs anymore that are just making decisions. They even have their own education technology specialists. And so it's important to know what their priorities are, who they're serving, the importance of it. And I think...
so could I
yes.
just chime in there, Ann, and say, so it would be good for that to happen, and it would be good for the educational innovation units to take on more importance, but we need leadership to change, because you can't take the traditional incentives where we say that innovation is a nice thing to do as long as you have your, tell me about your traditional scholarship, but it's not going to get you promotion, it's not going to get you tenure, it's not going to have you be honored within the institution. It could actually compromise your career. You can't do that and expect people to lean into innovation. So I think we need leadership to carve out sort of more spaces, and it doesn't have to take a ton of resources to do this, but to say, okay, this is part of how we take fundamental responsibility for the talent problem. This is part of our responsibility to the public. This is part of our responsibility to our students, and so we're gonna treat this work with due consideration.
So instead of looking at a measure of excellence as how selective is the institution in terms of admissions, it's maybe reframing that and looking at measures of engagement. How engaged are the people who work at this institution, and how well are they serving the needs of the economy around them, the society in which we live?
I think too, when I think institutions are starting to promote to students as they're recruiting students and the campus tours, they're actually showing, and I know ASU does this, and I just saw Iowa actually advertises in Inside Higher Ed that they take the students on the tours of their innovation centers because they're trying to spark that with students, and it's a way of staying relevant, right? And especially when there's an attack on the relevancy of a four-year degree. How do we remain relevant and have the impact? So we only have 2 minutes left, so if you had some wisdom to share, so many people in here want to collaborate with you, whether it's services or peer-to-peer institutions or products and services. How can they best work with you?
Yeah, I think to me personally, the ed tech business models are really interesting. I track them and I follow them, and it's interesting to see who's investing in them. I think it's going to be interesting. I think the whole webinar with a person model is getting a little played out. So it's going to be interesting to see what kind of shifts we see. It's really important. What I hope that doesn't, it does take relationships with higher ed institutions to actually get products or ideas or solutions implemented. And there's a couple of different ways of approaching that. What I'm hoping is we don't see is ed tech showing up on our campuses and knocking door to door on faculty doors to just implement products, because that's really creating a cognitive load for our students when 8 different faculty are adopting 12 different products, and that's not a strategic effort. And it creates challenges for us in terms of actually trying to bring that change at scale and being able to do it in a meaningful way. So,
Suzanne, do you have I'm going to cut because I'm spend time. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's listen, understand the problems we're trying to solve.
That's exactly what we used to tell our management students. It's don't sell product. Try and understand the customer's challenges, which in this case might be ours. Insert yourself into their workflows, but also understand that universities are different, as I think you just heard on the stage, right? Everyone has their own strategies, their own needs, and just, I think, be sensitive to that.
Harrison, bring us home.
We're interested in impact at scale. So we're not interested in boutique projects. We're not interested in proof of concepts unless there's a path to scale.
Yeah, that's fair.
So if you'd like to know more about the persona of these individuals and what they're focused on, what their obstacles are, what their priorities are. Feel free to sign up. It's a free report that will be out. James, what are we, June, I think we're shooting for? Yeah. So, well, thank you for coming today, and appreciate